We're going to start this lesson using the threepointlight.max file in the Chapter 12 folder. Now don't worry about messing with anything here. Both the torus knot and the wood plane have been locked down and frozen. Let's go ahead and select the perspective viewport and render that to see what we have so far. So basically we have a somewhat glassy torus knot on top of a wooden table. I realize it's not the best wood table, just bear with me. I didn't want to take the time to apply any maps to this and then take a risk that you wouldn't have those maps. Just a headache we really don't need to deal with for this example, so it's just brown and shiny. Let's go ahead and close this render window. And what we're going to talk about here is three-point lighting. Often newcomers to animation will be confused about how they should set up a lighting rig. Where do I even get started? Do I put lights really far away from objects? Do I put lights really close to the objects? How many should I have? Etc., etc. Well, like most things in Max, that's an art form. Figuring out where to put lights and when to use them and how far away they should be, well, that's just not something we're going to cover in an Essentials title. But I want to give you this trick here, three-point lighting. This is a standard way to light an object, whether you're in a photo studio or whether you're animating a 3D scene. And basically, three-point lighting is called three-point lighting because it utilizes three lights: a key light, a fill light, and a backlight. Let's talk about how this works. I'm going to go to the top viewport and the front viewport and zoom out just a little bit so I can see what's going on. And under the Create tab of the Command panel, select Lights. And let's create a target spot in the front viewport about where our torus knot is. Now, we're not seeing it in the perspective viewport because of the lowered opacity of the glass material that I applied to it. But it was there when we rendered, so we're all good. Now, it's important as we work in the perspective viewport to be aware of what angle we're looking at this when we're looking in the orthographic views. So if you look in the top view here, you can tell that my camera angle is basically coming in from this direction. So I'm going to right click and select Move, and then move this spotlight over just a little bit. I usually like my key lights to be over kind of at an angle as opposed to straight on. In my opinion, that works best for most scenes. So as I just kind of alluded to, this first spotlight is our key light, the first point of the three-point lighting setup. The key light is going to be the most important light. If, with this spotlight selected, we go over to the Modify tab, we'll get some options for this light. We'll talk more about these a little later, but I want to open up the menu that says Intensity, Color, and Attenuation. I talk about this multiplier very briefly. The multiplier talks about the intensity of the light. By default, lights come in at a 1.0 intensity level. And for the key light, that's going to work just fine. We're going to come back to this momentarily when we talk about the other lights that are not the key lights and take down their intensity just a little bit. We'll do that by going here. I'm also going to use this rollout here to turn on shadows by checking this checkbox. The second light I'm going to add as I go to the Create tab, making sure that Lights is selected here, I'm going to create an Omni about over here somewhere. Now, Omnis kind of come in on the floor, so I'm going to hit the letter W and then bring that light up a little bit, maybe move it over just a little bit. And again, this is our fill light. We get our shadows and our specular highlights out of our main first point light. But that's generally not enough light to look really good. So we bring in a fill light just to kind of add some ambient light throughout our scene. I'm going to go to the Modify tab though, and take this multiplier down quite a bit, maybe to 0.6 or so. Finally, we add our third point. Our third point is the backlight. It's generally a good idea to have light coming from behind an object, especially if you're working in 3D. This not only fills the scene with a little bit more ambient light, but also, because it's backlit, it tends to highlight the edges of an object and adds a little bit more 3D-ness, if I could make up a word real quick, making our object look like it has a little bit more dimension to it. Now I need to create another Omni, the third point in our three-point lighting setup, so I could just go back to the Create tab and make one, or I could use the good old cloning shortcut, Shift, to shift move this Omni light over and put that behind our object. The perspective view is giving us a good idea of where that's going to go. I'm going to let go here, just make a copy, and a 0.6 intensity is probably okay for the backlight. So now we have our three-point lighting set up. Point 1, the key light, the most powerful light, the light where we usually have our shadows coming from. We have the point 2 light, The fill light to fill our scene with a little bit more ambient light. And finally, we have the third light, the backlight, to light the back of the object, giving us a little bit more light, but more importantly, rounding out those edges so that we have 3 dimensions to our object. Let's select the perspective viewport and hit F9 one more time to render and see how this looks. Ooh, much cooler, much cooler. We see the shadow being cast here. We have our key light. This just looks significantly better. And it also should be pointed out real quick here as we're looking at this, that our material changes based on light. If I were to delete these now, this reflection would look much worse than it does now. And again, lighting and materials really work hand in hand to make an object more believable.